If you're a business owner, no one is more familiar with the curse of a 24-hour day than you. Menial tasks can eat away at your day, taking you away from those projects that fund and grow your company. Unfortunately, hiring is a major pain in the ass. Once you navigate all the tax hurdles and benefits packages, you've spent tens of thousands of dollars and numerous hours without any production and no guarantee that your investment will pay off. This is why Busy Bee's Virtual Services is Stranger Encounters' first sponsor. Bee takes a professional approach, full of passion and zeal for optimizing your time. She attacks every project with the vigor and endurance of a business owner because she understands how important your time and focus is. If you're constantly worried about emails, client relationships, and scheduling your next meeting at the expense of more profitable and meaningful tasks, Bee is ready to assist you in achieving maximum results. For a free consultation, call 337-287-8802 or click on the affiliate link on the front page of StrangerEncountersPodcast.com. Whether you're filling a full-time or part-time position, Bee offers affordable virtual services to minimize your risk and free up your day. Call 337-287-8802 or click on the affiliate link on the front page of StrangerEncountersPodcast.com.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing.
WikiLeaks! I love WikiLeaks.
And as I was getting off the plane, they were just announcing new WikiLeaks, and I wanted to stay there, but I didn't want to keep you waiting. I love reading those WikiLeaks.
We've learned so much from WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks! I love WikiLeaks.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing.
Welcome to Stranger Encounters. I am Tommy Salmons. Today I am rolling solo, and for those of you who regularly listen, thank you. And as you well know, last week I conducted an interview with Elizabeth Lee Voss of Consortium News about the Assange saga. Since the release of that episode, there has been no shortage of news dropping daily, it seems like. So I wanted to get into what's been going on. His asylum has been revoked. He's been arrested by British secret police is what I've heard them called, or the London police, UK police, whatever you want to call them. He had a hearing and he's now facing extradition to the US. So obviously this isn't good news, but hopefully we can find some light to shed on it and not be too down about it. So I just want to cover a brief timeline of events. My interview with Elizabeth was published on April 8th, and that was last Monday. On Thursday, April 11th, Ecuador revoked Assange's asylum. The secret police, who happened to have been staking out the embassy, and thanks to the journalism and the activism of Cassandra Fairbanks, we were able to see her confront them on video, and she was able to recognize a couple of the guys that had physically removed Julian Assange from the embassy after they were allowed to enter the embassy by the Ecuadorian ambassador. They carried him out the door at people on every side of him. They carried him out face first. And they loaded him into a police van as he was shouting, "The UK must resist the attempt by the Trump administration." That's about all I could make out. I don't know if he had mentioned anything else, but I heard him say the UK must resist, the UK must resist, the UK must resist this attempt by the Trump administration. So he may have said something else in that series of events. He was carrying a Gore Vidal book. I believe it was the history of the national security state or something like that. I apologize, I don't have that right here, but I did see that. And I know there are some rumors going around about what that means and if it means anything. And that's not for me to know at this moment. So I have no definitive idea. It would not surprise me that in 6.5 years, somebody with the knowledge of Assange and his understanding of what was coming for him, that he would have some sort of signal in place, some sort of cipher in place to handle his business and to send out messages on. So getting to the arrest of Assange, we have to look back at the U.S.'s role with Ecuador. So we look back to June 29th of 2018, and there was a report from the Washington Times that the White House had confirmed. It was written by Andrew Blake, and the article suggests that the White House did confirm that Pence met with then newly elected President Lenin Moreno about Julian Assange and about extradition to the United States. I was listening to Unity 4J, and if you haven't checked out any of the online vigils, I would greatly suggest that you do so. There's a lot of good information. And I apologize, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was discussing about why Sweden had continued the investigation on Assange so long after the charges had been recanted. And he was explaining that the extradition charges from Britain to the United States are a little bit harder to maneuver. But if Britain extradites him to Sweden, then he could be extradited to the United States almost immediately. And there won't be this year-long court battle that they're currently looking at. So that's interesting to keep in mind. I know I've seen a couple of news stories that suggested that Sweden was interested in reopening the investigation into Assange because he had been arrested by the UK. But back to the timeline. February 20th of 2019, it was reported that Ecuador had reached a $4.2 billion staff level financing deal with the International Monetary Fund. President Lenin Moreno said on Wednesday, as the Andean country grapples with a large fiscal deficit and heavy external debt, the country will also receive $6 billion in loans from multilateral institutions, including the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the CAF Andean Development Bank. I'm not sure exactly where the rest of these are located. I know the IMF's main location is in Washington, D.C., though. It strikes me as odd, and as they say, there's no such thing as coincidence in these matters, but it's quite coincidental that a Washington-based bank would guarantee a $4.2 billion loan to be paid off over 30 years to a country that has no chance of ever paying that off. And then they got another $6 billion from 4 other institutions. And I'm guessing that's a $6 billion total. So you're talking about $10.2 billion that the Ecuadorian country has pocketed And, it's kind of a suspicious timing. The timing is suspect. It would be very easy to speculate that $10.2 billion would be plenty of money for Lenin Moreno to decide to sell a potential asylum seeker. Again, I'm speculating, but that's just news that kind of fits into a narrative that people have been spreading, that Ecuador was looking to sell Assange. Then we get into April. We got April 5th. It started, the report came out, and WikiLeaks announced that the Ecuadorian embassy was set to expel Assange in hours or days. The same day, the United Nations torture investigator called on Ecuador not to expel Julian Assange from its embassy. He voiced concerns that he could be extradited to the United States and possibly face mistreatment. In a separate statement, also issued in Geneva on Friday, on the 5th, the UN Special Reporter, I think I mispronounced that, rapporteur, or whatever, on the right to privacy, Joe Canataci, said that he planned to meet Assange on April 25th after receiving assurances from the government of Ecuador that it will facilitate his visit to the country's embassy in London. So basically what we got going on here is you have these investigators, these torture investigators and these specialists from the UN looking at the entire situation with Assange. And after Cassandra Fairbanks had published her article about the conditions that Assange was living in, and that they were giving him a hard time about seeing visitors, and he was accusing them of being puppets of the United States government. Word got around, and the United Nations began to look at this and say, maybe these conditions aren't great. Maybe we need to go and investigate these conditions. And within the same day, WikiLeaks got word from a leak from a source they had inside of Ecuador that the embassy was looking to expel him. So obviously they did not want this investigation to take place. They did not want people to see what the living conditions were that Assange was living under. They did not want it to be publicized, and they definitely did not want the UN up their asses the entire time, levying fines or whatever they would have done in that case. So the next day, Ecuador denied the rumors that Assange's expulsion was imminent. And they came out and they flatly lied about it. Straight, just upfront denied it and just flat out lied about it, saying that there were no plans to expel Julian Assange from the embassy. And I know that had offered a lot of hope. And so the spirits of a lot of Assange backers and was lifted during that, because they were like, okay, well, maybe this is all just overreaction, or there was some false information leaked or something like that. And it wouldn't have been the first time. In the 6.5 years, I think I'd seen it at least once, maybe twice. And it may have happened more than that. I always watch the Assange saga out of my peripheral. It was never like a main focus of mine. It was always something I kind of kept an eye on and I was interested in, but I never spent a whole lot of time, unlike this past week, which I was completely obsessed with the story and watching what was going on. Something about the warning, the specification hours to days, and the undercover police that Cassandra Fairbanks had confronted, sitting out and staking out the embassy, morning, noon, and night, 24/7. Something about the entire situation felt like no matter what Ecuador was saying, it absolutely was imminent, and there was no way of avoiding this situation. And I found myself completely wrapped up in this story. So a couple of days later, it was April 10th. So just for my wife's sake, a few days later, April 10th, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange had been, it was discovered that he had been under sophisticated spying operations in the Ecuadorian embassy. WikiLeaks said video, audio, photographs, copy of private legal documents, and even medical reports turned up in Spain, where a group threatened to start publishing unless they were paid 3 million euros, which is about the equivalent of $3.4 million. I can't pronounce his name, so I'm going to skip over that. Kristen something, WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, said he met members of the group who were selling the material and that Spanish police are now investigating the case. So this was one day before his arrest. Now, that just tells me things were starting to snowball on top of the Ecuadorian government. They were realizing that between the UN moving in to investigate, the fact that they had handed over all these documents to blackmail Julian Assange and to extort WikiLeaks, and that came out before his arrest and before his expulsion, they were feeling the pressure that they had to get rid of him. They had no choice. They couldn't have held on to him in asylum and saved face. It would have been a very volatile situation, and it would have ended bad for Ecuador. And so they ran the CYA mission, and they dumped Julian Assange off onto the UK, expecting the UK to take care of it and extradite him to the United States to where he'd never be heard from again. And the spying documents leaked a little bit ahead of time, so they had no choice. They just ran with it. It just did not work out in their favor, no matter what they were planning. Maybe there was a miscommunication. Maybe the documents were leaked, and all this information, all these photographs, the videos. There's been rumor of videos of him having sex with different people that had visited him in the embassy, and people blackmailing him, and this, that, and the other. And I just think that's despicable. He's been locked up there for 6.5 years. You had to know, Pamela Anderson admitted that her visit with him was quite romantic. So that there were things going on. It's 6.5 years locked up in a room by yourself. When you get a visitor, I'm sure you're overly excited to see them, But this whole scenario, the whole thing, it just makes me realize, man, it brings me back to something that Scott Horton always talks about. And he talks about how when you or I, as individuals, will look at like Iran, or we'll look at Waco, and we'll be like, these people are no threat to us. But he says, but on the contrary, they're a threat to the state. They're a threat to the government. They're a threat to the powers that be. And it just got me thinking that there's no more dangerous position to be in than a threat to the U.S. global war machine. This is the position that Julian Assange put himself in by revealing U.S. war crimes in his publications. And though I have little respect for Donald Trump, and I think he's weaselly, especially coming out saying he knows nothing about WikiLeaks, I don't believe there's any elected official with the power to stand up to the permanent government that's been in place since the National Security Act of 1947. unless that politician is determined to be the next JFK. I mean, honestly, I just don't see it. And, Julian Assange standing up for what he believed in and giving his entire life for what he believed in is an inspiration. No matter what you think about him as a person, completely inspirational. And he lived out that Ron Paul saying that truth is treason in an empire of lies. He was never afraid to speak truth to power. He was always willing to speak truth to power. And I admire him for that. But I never thought I'd see the day when we'd see a publisher and an award-winning journalist find themselves a victim to extraordinary rendition, which is basically what's happening right now. I think Jonathan Cook had an article. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. He called it media rendition. He said, after 7 years of deceptions about Assange, the U.S. readies for its first media rendition. And this is by Jonathan Cook in antiwar.com. And it starts off the first two sentences. For 7 years, from the moment Julian Assange first sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, they have been telling us we were wrong, that we were paranoid conspiracy theorists. We were told there was no real threat of Assange's extradition to the United States. Since the arrest of Assange, the state propaganda has been cranked up. And well, back to this by Jonathan Cook. We know that there's definitely going to be extradition trials, and he's going to appeal it, and he's going to fight it. Could take a year, could take 5 years. I don't know how long this is going to take, but he's not going to be a free man in the period of time that this is going on. I don't see any way that they can let him out of jail. They're going to consider him a flight risk because he can always try to seek asylum somewhere else. And so they'll never let him out of prison, no matter what happens, until this extradition trial and hearings are over. He's going to be in prison. But you notice that lately the propaganda has been cranked up. The U.S., I've noticed this, it seems like every quote-unquote journalist, basically mainstream mouthpieces, is leaning on that phrase that Assange isn't a journalist. And I got into this with Elizabeth the other day when we chatted. But I just want to, I think this is a good point to make. And to get into the awards and nominations that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were nominated for. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, WikiLeaks started in 2006, from my recollection. In 2008, the Index on Censorship presented WikiLeaks with their inaugural Economist New Media Award. In 2009, Amnesty International awarded WikiLeaks their media award for exposing extrajudicial killings and disappearances in Kenya. In 2009, Ars Electronica awarded WikiLeaks an award of distinction in the digital communities category. In 2010, Time Magazine Person of the Year, People's Choice, highest global vote, and the Sam Adams Award for Integrity was presented to Julian Assange. In 2011, Walkley Foundation for Journalism awarded the most outstanding contribution to journalism, Walkley Award, to WikiLeaks. The Sydney Peace Foundation Gold Medal, the Martha Gellhorn Prize for Journalism, the Blanquerna Award for Best Communicator, the Walkley Award for Most Outstanding Contribution to Journalism, the Voltaire Award for Free Speech, the International Piero Passetti Journalism Prize of the National Union of Italian Journalists, the Jose Cuso Press Freedom Award from Collectio Professional Journalists, and the Blanquero Faculty of Communication Award, the Blanquero Best Communicator Award to WikiLeaks. That was all in 2011. In 2012, the Privacy International Hero of Privacy Award went to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. In 2013, the Global Exchange Human Rights People's Choice Award, the Yoko Ono Lennon Courage Award for the Arts, and the Brazilian Press Association Human Rights Award. In 2014, the Kazakhstan Union of Journalists Top Prize. Additionally, WikiLeaks was nominated for awards but not win. 1st of February 2011, Norwegian politician and musician Snorre Valen nominated WikiLeaks for the Nobel Peace Prize, totaling 6 nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize in consecutive years between 2010 and 2015 for the organization. In 2015, WikiLeaks received a nomination for the UN Mandela Prize, 6 nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize. The U.S. isn't the only country spewing talking points of the intelligence community, though. They pretend that you can't find out that these are award-winning journalists, that these guys have been spreading the truth since their founding in 2006. And in her article, The Legal Narrative Funnel That's Being Used to Extradite Assange, Caitlin Johnston reports, following the arrest of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, top UK officials all began simultaneously piping the following exact phrase into public consciousness: no one is above the law. This goes to show that in the United Kingdom, no one is above the law, Prime Minister Theresa May told Parliament after Assange's arrest. Julian Assange is no hero and no one is above the law, tweeted Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt. Nearly 7 years after entering the Ecuadorian embassy, I can confirm Julian Assange is now in police custody and rightfully facing justice in the UK. I would like to thank Ecuador for its cooperation and at Met Police UK for its professionalism. No one is above the law, tweeted Home Security Sajid Javid. Over and over again, that phrase showed up to be unquestioningly rebleeded by the human livestock known as the British press in all their reporting on the Assange case. No one is above the law. No one is above the law. No one is above the law. Something tells me they really want people to know that with regard to Julian Assange, no one is above the law. And it's crazy how they all just fall into the same talking points, and people just follow them. They just listen and they start repeating it, and you'll fucking hear your neighbor one day just repeating the talking points that the intelligence community is pushing out there upon everybody, and we're just supposed to just go with it. We're supposed to be okay with it. We're just supposed to accept it for what it is. And at first, the narrative was that Assange was arrested on a warrant for skipping bail. But Robert Mackey writes in his article, Julian Assange arrested in London after Ecuador withdraws asylum, U.S. requests extradition. In this article, he states that a subsequent police statement confirmed that Assange was further arrested on behalf of the United States authorities at 10:53 a.m. Oh, I'm sorry. I misread that. So 10 hours after his arrival, about 11 hours after his arrival at Central London Police Station, the U.S. asked for extradition, and stated that this is an extradition warrant under Section 73 of the Extradition Act. Assange was then taken from a central London police station to Westminster Magistrates Court. The force explained that it acted initially on a warrant issued by that court after Assange took refuge in the embassy in 2012, violating bail conditions by not attending a hearing on his attempt to resist extradition to Sweden, where he was wanting for questioning on sexual misconduct allegations leveled against him by two women. In May of 2017, Swedish prosecutors announced that they were closing their investigation into the sexual assault allegations in light of Assange's asylum and the time that had elapsed. But if you back your ass up to the article by Jonathan Cook in antiwar.com, that article that I was quoting from earlier, after 7 years of deception about Assange, the U.S. readies for its first media rendition. He gets into the rape charges a little bit. He talks about the recanting of the evidence of the testimony and the dropping of the charges, and how that information was come about, which is really important because they didn't want you to know that the charges had been dropped. So Jonathan Cook goes on to write, the media and political courtiers endlessly emphasized Assange's bail violation in the UK, ignoring the fact that asylum seekers fleeing legal and political persecution don't usually honor bail conditions imposed by the very state authorities from which they are seeking asylum. The political and media establishment ignored the mounting evidence of a secret grand jury in Virginia formulating charges against Assange and ridiculed WikiLeaks, concerns that the Swedish case might be cover for a more sinister attempt by the U.S. to extradite Assange and lock him away in a high-security prison, as had happened to whistleblower Chelsea Manning. And if you remember correctly, we're still going through this, but that exact grand jury is why Chelsea Manning is in prison today. But going on, they belittled the 2016 verdict of a panel of United Nations legal scholars that the UK was arbitrarily detaining Assange. The media were more interested in the welfare of his cat. They ignored the fact that after Ecuador changed presidents, with the new one keen to win favor with Washington, Assange was placed under more and more severe forms of solitary confinement. He was denied access to visitors and basic means of communications, violating both his asylum status and his human rights, and threatening his mental and physical well-being. Equally, they ignore the fact that Assange had been given diplomatic status by Ecuador as well as Ecuadorian citizenship. Britain was obligated to allow him to leave the embassy using his diplomatic immunity to travel unhindered to Ecuador. No mainstream journalist or politician thought this significant either. They turned a blind eye to the news that after refusing to question Assange in the UK, Swedish prosecutors had decided to quietly drop the case against him in 2015. Sweden had kept the decision under wraps for more than 2 years. It was a Freedom of Information request by an ally of Assange, not a media outlet, that unearthed documents showing that Swedish investigators had, in fact, wanted to drop the case against Assange back in 2013. The UK, however, insisted that they carry on with the charade so that Assange could remain locked up. A British official emailed the Swedes, "Don't you dare get cold feet," he said, or she said, whoever said, they said, I guess would be politically correct. The non-binary son of the daughter said, whatever I'm supposed to say. That said, it said, the thing said. Okay, I'm getting off course here. Back to the article. Most of the other documents relating to these conversations were unavailable. They had been destroyed by the UK's Crown Prosecution Service in violation of protocol, but no one in the political and media establishment cared, of course. Similarly, they ignored the fact that Assange was forced to hole up for years in the embassy under the most intense form of house arrest. Even though he no longer had a case to answer in Sweden, they told us, apparently in all seriousness, that he had to be arrested for his bail infraction, something that would normally be dealt with by fine. And possibly most egregiously of all, most of the media refused to acknowledge that Assange was a journalist and publisher, even though by failing to do so, they exposed themselves to the future use of the same draconian sanctions should they or their publications ever need to be silenced. They signed off on the right of the U.S. authorities to seize any foreign journalist anywhere in the world and lock him or her out of sight. They opened the door to a new special form of rendition for journalists. This was never about Sweden or bail violations or even about the discredited Russiagate narrative, as anyone who was paying the vaguest attention should have been able to work out. It was about the U.S. deep state doing everything in its power to crush WikiLeaks and make an example of its founder. It was about making sure there would never again be a leak like that of Collateral Murder, the military video released by WikiLeaks showing a 2007 U.S. soldiers celebrating as they murdered Iraqi citizens, including reporters, I might add. It was about making sure there would never again be a dump of U.S. diplomatic cables like those released in 2010 that revealed the secret machinations of the U.S. empire to dominate the planet, whatever the cost. I just want to take a minute, like at this point, get out of these fucking articles just for a second and into my own head for a minute. I want to take a minute to look at what we're learning about journalists from this case. It's evident to me that there are those journalists that are honest actors chasing stories and holding the state accountable. And then there are state actors or assets posing as journalists. If nothing else, some good that's come from the Assange arrest is that it has acted as a purity test, separating the wheat from the chaff. Those state actors spewing the state propaganda or remaining silent on the rendition of a journalist are a threat to the free press. Independent media, independent journalists, and true investigators, they're going to be looking to shut down dissenting voices, and it's going to make it even easier. And they've already been doing it. They've been using, we've all seen the use of Twitter or Facebook or YouTube to silence dissenting voices. But this is a much bigger step. This isn't kicking Alex Jones off of a platform and allowing him to continue to publicize from his website. This is absolutely silencing a journalist. They're looking to silence Julian Assange for the rest of his life. They can't have him saying anything else. They can't take the chance that he knows something or he has access to some other files that are going to completely dismantle the war propaganda. I don't know how quickly they'll jump on that. I think what they're going to do is they're going to lock him away. And then they're going to start slowly shutting the door on this open market of information and ideas. They're going to slowly just continue to shut this door in our face. They're not going to slam it in our face. There would be too much of a backlash for that. But they will continue to ease that door closed on us until there's no dissenting voices left. Now, talking about the extradition to the United States, I think it's only appropriate that I dig into a little bit of the indictment. And I don't know if everybody's read it. If you haven't read it, it's 7 pages, not much to it. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to read the part that I found most interesting and most telling. And what I believe that what it sounds like that they're leaning upon for the most part to follow through with this extradition. Between, in, or around January 2010 and May 2010, Manning downloaded 4 nearly complete databases from the departments and agencies of the United States. These databases contained approximately 90,000 Afghanistan war-related significant activity reports, 400,000 Iraq war-related significant activities reports, 800 Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs, and 250,000 U.S. Department of State cables. Many of these records were classified pursuant to Executive Order Number 13526 or its predecessor orders. Manning provided the records to agents of WikiLeaks so that WikiLeaks could publicly disclose them on its website. WikiLeaks publicly released the vast majority of the classified records on its website in 2010 and 2011. Now here's where we get into what they're calling conspiracy. And I heard Glenn Greenwald address this. So after I run through what this conspiracy to hack is, I'll give you Glenn Greenwald's interpretation of it. So back to the document. On or about March 8th, 2010, Assange agreed to assist Manning in cracking a password stored on United States Department of Defense computers connected to the Secret Internet Protocol Network, a United States government network used for classified documents and communications as designated according to Executive Order Number 13526 or its predecessor orders. Manning, who had access to the computers in connection with her duties as an intelligence analyst, was also using the computers to download classified records to transmit to WikiLeaks. Army regulations prohibit Manning from attempting to bypass or circumvent security mechanisms on government-provided information systems and from sharing personal accounts and authenticators such as passwords. The portion of the password Manning gave to Assange to crack was stored as a hash value in a computer file that was accessible only by users with administrative level privileges. Manning did not have administrative level privileges and used special software, namely a Linux operating system, to access the computer file and obtain the portion of the password provided to Assange. Cracking the password would have allowed Manning to log onto the computers under a username that did not belong to her. Such a measure would have made it more difficult for investigators to identify Manning as the source of disclosure of classified information. Okay, so that discloses what Glenn Greenwald had described this entire situation as being. And so from what I understand from what Glenn Greenwald said, the way that this works is you will advise a source to be as careful as they can to keep themselves secret. Not only to protect the source, but to protect your flow of information coming in. Because without that source, you don't have that flow of information coming in. So what you would do is you would give your source the advice to try a different login username. And by trying a different login username, you would have to have another password. So they were trying to figure out another password for another login username in order to hide who was actually looking at these documents. Because if Chelsea Manning would have signed in as herself to look at these documents, there would have been record that she was the one that was looking at these documents. So that's basically what I understand. So his attempts weren't necessarily, from the way Glenn Greenwald explains it, it's kind of a catch-22. His attempts weren't to hack or to break a password as much as his attempts were to hide the identity of his source. So going on with the indictment, I'm just going to read a few more paragraphs here. Prior to the formation of the password cracking agreement, Manning had already provided WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of classified records that she downloaded from departments and agencies of the United States, including the Afghanistan war-related significant activity reports and Iraq war-related significant activity reports. At the time he entered into this agreement, Assange knew that Manning was providing WikiLeaks with classified records containing national defense information of the United States. Assange was knowingly receiving such classified records from Manning for the purpose of publicly disclosing them on the WikiLeaks website. Because that's what he fucking does. These fucking people write this shit like they're total fucking morons. Like they don't understand that Julian Assange is a goddamn journalist and that he's doing his fucking job and that he's fucking holding a mirror up to the United States government saying, look at all the bullshit that you're involved in and you need to stop this shit. If they weren't fucking committing war crimes, there would have been no need to leak this shit. Anyways. For example, on March 7, 2010, Manning and Assange discussed the value of the Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs. And on March 8, 2010, before entering the password cracking agreement, Manning told Assange that she was, quote, throwing everything she had on JTF, GTMO, and Assange now. Manning also said, quote, after this upload, that's all I really have got left. And this is where Assange first began to conspire with Manning. To which Assange replied, quote, curious eyes never run dry in my experience. Following this, between March 28, 2010 and April 9, 2010, Manning used a United States Department of Defense computer to download the U.S. Department of State cables that WikiLeaks later released publicly. So, because Julian Assange said, curious eyes never run dry, he forced Chelsea Manning to try to crack a password and get him those cables. Why not? So now that's what the indictment said. And on the charges that are pending at this moment, hacking, whatever, conspiracy to hack, whatever they're trying to fucking charge him with. Conspiracy to hack. I know what they're fucking trying to charge him with. I just get so fucking irritated, man. This story fucking irritates the fuck out of me there was a point in fucking time I defended this goddamn government. It wasn't that fucking long ago. It's like 5 fucking years ago, 6 fucking years ago, something like that. I defended this fucking government. And now I'm like, what a fucking piece of shit I was. What a fucking piece of shit I was. What the fuck is there to fucking defend? Anyway, but so the charges that are leveled against Julian Assange at the moment I think they said that he's looking at like 5 years in a federal prison. But according to Nick Miller of the Sydney Morning Herald, more charges await Assange if he is extradited to the U.S. And this is no surprise. The U.S. prides itself on its strength. Who cares if the only battle they can win is against a sickly 47-year-old man that's been locked in a room for 6.5 years? This will prove to those pesky terrorists just how powerful the U.S. is, even if a bunch of barefoot goat farmers have been holding off the greatest military might in the history of the world for 17 years. Who fucking cares? We got Julian Assange. He's the real threat. He publishes fucking information. Let's get that motherfucker. There's a lot of speculation on whether or not Assange will be assassinated. So I'll be the first to tell you I don't think that'll happen. I don't think it's necessary. The U.S. is making a statement telling other journalists that they better not publish embarrassing stories of the great power committing war crimes. They're setting a precedent with Assange that it doesn't matter who you are, where you are, or what your intent is. It's our way or the highway. It's their world and we're just living in it. The die has been cast. Those worried about the rise of the New World Order have missed its growth before their very eyes, and the new Rome has announced its existence and jurisdiction as the world in which we all live. The U.S. is no longer a country, but a global caliphate, spreading the religion of dominance, fear, and subjugation. They've rid us of any preconceived notions of a constitution or natural rights, and they're using Assange as a comma in a run-on sentence of terror that's been aiming at world dominance and conquest for the last 100 years. Unfortunately for the tyrants that would see themselves persecuted journalists for telling the truth, the human spirit is not easily broken, and somewhere within each of us is the desire to live free of oppression and control. Today, as I have been organizing my thoughts in the events that led to the imprisonment of an award-winning journalist, another story broke. Headline: Ecuadorian government websites hacked and taken offline over Julian Assange arrest. That's right. Cassandra Fairbanks writes, the Central Bank of Ecuador, Ministry of Interior, Ecuadorian Assembly in UK, and the government of Ecuador's websites were all knocked offline on Friday evening in response to the arrest of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. At least one Ecuadorian government subdomain was also hijacked with a photo of Assange and a quote from the 2019 Nobel Peace Prize nominated publisher. The quote read, "You have to start with the truth. The truth is the only way that we can get anywhere. Because any decision making that is based upon lies or ignorance can't lead to a good conclusion." You know, I look at the events of the past week. I've been obsessing with this story, recognizing the propaganda meant to dehumanize an asylum seeker, finding myself angry over the people repeating the state talking points, Trump's spineless response about WikiLeaks, Clinton's cackle, and sweating over getting the podcast together in a way that did justice to the story, only to realize that Julian Assange summed it all up when he told his attorney to tell all the people, "I told you so." That was Stranger Encounters. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing.
WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks.
And you know, as I was getting off the plane, they were just announcing new WikiLeaks, and I wanted to stay there, but I didn't want to keep you waiting. I love reading those WikiLeaks.
We've learned so much from WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks.
I know nothing about WikiLeaks. It's not my thing.